I think a lot of people get really excited about a lot of ideas in sci-fi and overplay their hand immensely.
Right now, the punch comes in from the outside side. He smacks him in the face. What is he gonna do? After our Ovaltine, we'll find out.
The first thing I ever recall watching when I was 4 years old was Star Trek. That was the beginning, and I've just never stopped.
You don't have to be so heavy-handed in trying to explain this in like reality of physics, because at the end of the day, I'm on board.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Writing Prose. We are now on episode 10, and I have an amazing panel and two awesome guests with us today.
Did you say you are an amazing panel?
I have.
Oh,
Did I say
okay.
are?
I am an amazing panel. I'm pretty sure.
I have.
Shae got it right.
Fuck you all. Anyway, speaking of this slightly less amazing panel now, we have Gibby over there. How you doing, Gibby?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. We got Cy. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Really excited to be here with our full panel.
I know, and we have Mr. Absentee himself, Mr. Eric Canete.
I just trademarked and copyrighted that name. Thank you very much. 15 cents from you, please. Thank you for having me. Glad to be back.
Welcome back. We've missed you for sure. And, of course, we've got two phenomenal guests. First up, we have Narwhal. How are you?
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm good.
Yes, it's super exciting to have you on. And then we also have Mr. Aaron Dowen. How are you, sir?
I am doing swell. Thank you for having me.
Well.
Oh, swell.
Little ice, that'll go right down.
Mm-hmm.
Well. All right, so to kind of kick us off, we decided that today's topic would be, with the spread that we have here, it would be good to talk about how you guys pick storytelling genres, because I know that Narwhal and Gib definitely jump around to a bunch of different areas. Aaron, you were talking about you do a whole bunch of different stuff in the works. I don't. I do a project, stick to that for a while, but I also don't write a lot, so that might actually be more. I'm just scared to write. So let's start with Narwhal. How do you go about picking which genre you're going to go for?
Yeah, good question. I think the easiest, quickest way that I get lots of inspiration is just from watching movies, and they're usually older movies. A lot of times they're lower budget, and there's a streaming service called Tubi that is awesome. It has tons of awesome old movies. And a specific example is for Foreign Agent. I was lucky to have kind of a buddy who's almost like a mentor. He worked for a long time at a video rental store, so he would give me free rentals. I'd give him free art. So he had me watch all these weird movies, and he gave me the two super low budget westerns from Monty Hellman in the 60s. They're called The Shooting and Ride the Whirlwind, and they both star Jack Nicholson, super young. And those movies are really awesome and really creative. Sometimes the lower budget makes the storytelling more creative. And that got me real inspired, and I wrote Foreign Agent kind of from that inspiration.
That's really cool. And I used to work at a video rental store back when they were a thing. You do see a lot of really weird ass low budget movies when they're just all at your disposal all the time. And a lot of those low budget ones, like you said, they have to be more creative, because I can't, dazzle you with like super cool FX and splashes and CGI and all of that. So I got to find ways to really kind of invoke certain feelings. Like, I think my favorite are low budget horrors, because when you find a low budget horror done well, it's usually the scariest fucking thing you've ever seen.
Yeah, the reason that it's working are like more clear, I think. Like, even like another good example is Bad Taste. It's like Peter Jackson's first movie, and it's so like at first glance it's like you might think it's terrible, but if you just sit down and get on its level, then it's like amazing, and you can actually see the through line all the way to like Lord of the Rings or whatever. But I was talking to someone about it, and they said that movie Bad Taste, they said every shot means something, and I was like, oh, that's true. Like, a lot of movies that's not true, and in Bad Taste it's this low budget movie, but there's constantly ideas in every single shot that he's throwing at the audience, and
I mean,
it makes it pretty entertaining.
There was an entire generation of movie where we were talking about like high budget, low budget, right? Like, at one point in its incarnation, Hollywood just had a budget, right? Like, sometimes it would be the end product would be crappy, right? There's like anything leading into the mid 70s just had a specific budget, and there's very few notable ones when you start talking about like, oh, there's a reason why they say like, oh, Cleopatra was so dang expensive, or you know what I mean. But budget Hollywood movies just had a budget. It's not only up until recently that we started throwing obscene amounts of money at everything, right?
Yeah.
So when a movie turns out to be like crap, I don't know. It's like I always contextualize it when the movie was made, and I go like, yeah, that's pretty they were focusing on story, they were focusing on character. There's not going to be too much going on there. Maybe a location that's exceptional, right? But few and far between am I ever wowed by movies as far as like production value before 1973, 75.
Well, and I think that a lot of movies that have the higher budgets use the higher budget as an excuse for shitty storytelling. Like,
Right.
they don't actually have the ability to tell a really good story. They're not thinking of it in creative terms to really kind of sell you on the emotion. They're just trying to, it's that whole give them their old razzle dazzle, you know, you wow people with a whole bunch of special effects, and then the storytelling can fall flat because that was a really cool explosion, or that was a really cool like monster.
Or you
that we
hire
saw.
a very talented actor to deliver very
Yep.
bad lines with gravitas. Like
Yeah.
what was that movie Chris Rock and Anthony Hopkins did, where Chris Rock was a twin brother of a CIA agent, but he was also a street hustler, and Anthony
That
Hopkins
works
was
for me.
his handler.
That-
Yeah, but Hopkins carried it because he's freaking Anthony Hopkins.
Right. Well, that's the thing that always kind of bugs me, is it's like I like movies. I don't really get into like the celebrity worship side of things a whole lot, and I love video production. That was actually what I wanted to do when I was in high school. And so when I see these kinds of movies, that there's no excuse for you to not have been able to tell a good story other than you just didn't want to. Like, you had the cast, you had the budget, you had the location, you had the script, and somehow just absolute horseshit is what came out. And that's what most movies that I've seen recently have been. It's just been total garbage when there's no reason for it. Like, the superhero movies, you have fucking fantastical characters. How do you make that shit? How
Right.
do you make that boring? I don't understand that.
The last couple of Marvel flicks, especially. I mean, I'm not just trying to be shitty or dumping on something. I intend to enjoy them, but like when you have something like Winter Soldier, which I really enjoyed because it was filmed on location, it looked good. They were in New York, and then you've got the COVID Marvel movies like Doctor Strange, which was shot at like the place down in Georgia. What do they call it? The Vault, where it's just simply it's just a giant green screen wall. So you have people just react. Every background's fake, and everything around looks like Star Trek rubber rock style sets because they had to make it fast and they had to do it within inside a closed location. And it doesn't. Well, maybe in Star Trek it did, but in this it looks hokey, you know, and it looks
Right.
kind of. All the lighting and the special effects in the background and the budget to fix it it's still a bad story. So
Yeah. Well, there's ways to do those kinds of stories in those sorts of settings, but it does take very creative minds, and it does take maybe a little bit more time than what they had. And if all you're doing is pumping it out to get the money, then they're just trying to capitalize on a namesake during COVID when everybody's stuck at home. They're like, hey, we're going to release this. You can watch it and rent it while you're sitting at home and, try to not catch COVID. Like, what else are people going to do? You have a captive audience, so it doesn't have to be anything big. All right, Aaron, how do you pick your genres?
In a similar vein, so different movies, things I enjoyed growing up, books that I like to read, or just random stuff in passing that I'll hear, just pick up from eavesdropping on conversations and stuff, and just like, oh, you know what, that'd be a cool little plot point. And then sometimes I'll build a whole storyline off of one single plot point. It's just something that I picked up in passing, and it's like, well, what would I do to actually expand this? Or the other thing I like to do is, like, if I see two people arguing on the side of the street, I either A, imagine that they're arguing about how to make a sub sandwich because it goes well with the hand gestures, or I try to take what they're doing and turn it into, like, the most dramatic possible version of their story. And I think that's just the mind of a writer, though. Let's see how far we can push things. But as far as picking actual which subjects I want to go to, which genres I want to go into, it's really whatever I'm feeling in the moment. And then I just start stacks of notebooks filled with different stories. And maybe someday before I die, they'll all come out.
May I follow up on that? Can you give that in context to one of the projects that you're working on or you've worked on?
Yeah. So One Last Job is it's a spy thriller, and it's purposefully black and white. The reason why is because I grew up as a massive James Bond fan. And then you have the newer stuff with, like, John Wick and the more kind of action heavy side of stuff. And One Last Job it kind of became a fusion of that with Jason Bourne, which was another thing that was big when I was little. And then Chuck is a television series that maybe not a lot of people remember, but it's one of my all-time favorites. Chuck. And so, yeah, when I play off of humorous stuff, Chuck's always in the back of my mind. And then more than any of those would be Burn Notice, where it was on when I was a teenager and had a huge influence on how I wanted to portray a character. But not only that, one of the things that Burn Notice did that I think was extremely smart of them is that one of their executive producers that they brought on was an ex-CIA spy. And so there's levity to the storyline when they're giving you narration about this is how you build this particular bomb to do this particular style of destruction, or this is how you rig this kind of bug to do this specific thing. Like, that's a different level of storytelling because you're actually bringing in factual information to draw people further into a story. So that, and then you have stuff like Tilt, which is our bigger superhero one right now, and that's because I grew up loving superheroes.
So there was one thing that you said that I find kind of interesting because I'm going through and I'm editing for somebody right now, and they're doing a sci-fi book, and they've got, all of this really technical jargon that they're throwing in there to kind of immerse you into this is what's going on in various panels. But what I'm noticing is that we've got, a 7-panel page, and every panel is just packed with technical jargon. And so how do you find kind of the borderline of, because once at some point throwing out acronyms, they no longer matter. Like, I'm active duty military, Gibby is former, and both of us could tell you how many times people have thrown acronyms at us and we're like, no idea what you're talking about, man. And they're like, the thing, and I'm like, no, sorry, you're gonna have to break it down for me like Barney, I have no clue. So how do you kind of decide, like, okay, these ones are the ones that I'm gonna go with, but if I go this far, like, now we're just kind of getting into the weeds and it's getting a little bit too like a movie, because you have such limited space in comics versus if you were doing a film?
For me, I ask the question, is it important or is it just something I think is cool to throw in here? Sometimes I will throw something in just because I think it's cool, or maybe like a little inside joke that's just for myself. For instance, like in One Last Job, I named the private flight company Tedeschi's but it's because in my mind I read it as To Disguise, and it's a flight company, so it's a really dumb thing that nobody knows. But I did it just for my own humor.
Except everyone knows now, and now
That's
we're all going to look at it
right.
and be like, I want this as a shirt because that's amazing.
Which we did. But yeah, so
Because everyone watches our show, therefore everyone.
Exactly. Everyone now knows because we are obviously the most popular thing on YouTube.
whoops, I spoiled it. Yeah, but it's the big question of, is it important, or is it just something I think sounds cool or makes me sound smart or whatever? And it's your job as the editor to kind of get to be a little bit of a jerk about it and be like, look, this takes you out of the flow of the story. It doesn't elevate the story in any way. If it's not necessary, I say just don't put it in. And it's hard as a writer because, like, I'll do stuff and then in Tilt there was this whole fight scene that I had, like, I thought really creative dialogue, and then I got the color page back before we even put the letters, and I was like, man, this means a lot more without any words on the page. And so, I took the dialogue off the page and just had it as a fight scene with no dialogue. And as a writer, it's like, I just insulted myself. I took my own work out of there. But it didn't, the stuff that was in there, was it more for me or was it for the reader? And it was more for me, so I'm willing to take the action to actually clear up the story for the reader. I don't want them to get lost in jargon, and I don't want them to have to get stuck on a page for too long trying to decode and decipher what I'm trying to say. I'd rather them be able to hit the pacing of the story the way that I created it.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes into show, don't tell. Like, if it's a visual medium, you don't have to tell everything that's happening. You have to be like, wow, that was one hell of a punch. I'll get you, Pilgrim, whatever.
Right.
Like, you don't got to do all of that.
What the fuck was that?
So where did John Wayne come from? Because I keep it.
Don't
That
worry.
was a 1940s radio drama.
Pilgrim.
Right now, the punch comes in from the outside side. He smacks him in the face. What is he going to do?
Exactly.
After our Ovaltine, we'll find out.
Yeah.
I love Gibbs Little. That's now your quote. Your Ovaltine announcer voice is going to be your
Quality
quote.
One other thing about picking genres too is I think a lot of times a second subgenre comes up and you kind of pick them in pairs because you'd be like sci-fi, but then you're like, when you really know what the story is and get a lot of inspiration can be when you identify it as like, oh, this is a heist in space, is like a sci-fi heist story or a sci-fi home invasion story. And I have a list of all of like possible subgenres because a lot of times those are like baked and ready story that you can plop into your story.
Sci-fi musical.
Yeah. But like home invasion is a big one. That's actually what the Foreign Agent one was, because as soon as you plug in home invasion, your whole story's there almost, and then you just got to write it. And you could plug that into anything. That one felt like almost too easy, and that's like a lot of low budget movies are home invasions. So I was like, I could write home invasion stories for the rest of my life.
Right.
And I was like, no,
It's copy
just
paste.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because when you do when you do secondary genres and things like that, people will still gravitate toward the one that they're more into. And so for us, we have Welcome to Everville, which was a dark fantasy horror, and I put it in that order of dark fantasy, then horror. But most everybody is like, oh, it's a horror book, but it's really not at its core. But I've noticed that certain genres, the people will kind of grab whichever piece of it is they care about more.
Yeah, that's if they're starved for it a little bit too.
Right.
Yeah.
Because even horror, like, it's it's popular, everyone loves it, but it's kind of hard to find,
A good horror.
to satiate that constant need. In comics.
Yeah.
Well, also horror, so in of itself is such a broad topic. Are we
Absolutely.
talking like metaphorical horror, body horror, invasion horror, like supernatural horror? What kind of horror are you looking at? I mean, a Cronenberg horror and a King horror can be vastly different things.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Very, very true. Sigh.
I'm ill prepared.
You're always ill prepared, so strap in and come up with an answer. Obviously, you tend to stick with one genre because you mostly do the fanfic side of things. But when you want to actually write your own stuff that isn't necessarily a fanfic, what kind of genres do you think that you're probably going to be gravitating to more?
Sci-fi.
Yeah.
Sci-fi. I've been the first thing I ever recall watching when I was 4 years old was Star Trek. So, I mean, that was the beginning, and I've just never stopped. Stopped watching Star Trek, yes, but stopped loving sci-fi, no. So, and I think, no offense to other genres, but I think sci-fi is a little bit of heavier lifting than say an action movie or something like that. You really have to have a Why are you making that face, Shae?
I'm not a sci-fi nut. That's why I find it interesting hearing you talk about sci-fi, because that's probably, out of every genre, that is probably my least favorite.
Well,
and I think that it's just I
was going
haven't.
to ask about the heavy lifting.
Yeah,
you have
I'm
to have more
curious.
depth of your world. I mean, if you're talking about, like, I don't know, let's Buffy. All right, so you have a little bit of lore in your world, but in the beginning of that, there really wasn't much.
Right.
But if you're writing sci-fi, then okay, is there artificial gravity? How far in the future is it? There's your pterodactyl is fucking distracting me, but the point is you have to work out all of these little bits and pieces to make the world work, and to have that answer ready as you write the next page and the next. So that's what as a writer, it's heavier lifting, because you have to draw your audience in with those answers. And going back to what you guys were saying before, as an editor, you have to ask yourself, especially in sci-fi, what does this add? Is it just my own kind of I don't know, masturbatory kind of intellectual whatever to have 17 volumes written about this 48-page book that you're doing, or do these things actually assist your audience in any way to getting there, and if so, how much? And that's really the thing that with Shae and I editing that work that we're gonna have to fine tooth comb it, because I mean it is so dense, and sometimes that's warranted. I mean, if I pick up Dune, I want that kind of dense material. I want 10,000 years worth of history, and going thousands of years into the future. But for some things it's just not needed.
I think that might be kind of one of the things that's always pulled me out of sci-fi, is because you do have to kind of build from scratch the parameters of your world, and what if physics look like for you, because it's in the future and things could be quite different than what we're necessarily used to, being on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of people get really excited about a lot of ideas in sci-fi and overplay their hand immensely. And then it just becomes a slog of, okay, now who were the Gorgons and who are the Molcock people and the other ones? And I don't even know what's happening anymore. And what the fuck is going... This all sounds very sexual, and I don't know what's happening.
Especially the molecock.
The molecock, yeah.
I've talked to people that they run into a problem where they have 3 notebooks of world building, and then they don't know where to start their story. They get paralysis of analysis.
Yep.
Kind of,
Yeah,
Well,
and that's so bad.
That's
It's also
starting.
the science-
What is the central point of your story? I think that's like you just said.
Well, who are
People
your
get bogged down.
characters? That's
Exactly.
the thing, is, your backdrop means, I mean, frankly, fuck all. If your characters aren't worth reading, I mean,
Yeah,
Because
you've
that's
got
what
3
people
notebooks.
connect with.
You've got 3 notebooks of world. Now tell me about the people that inhabit your world.
it's like I know, because I actively, not actively, but I generally I lean away from harder
You backed
science
away from
fiction.
that really quick.
yeah, I know.
I actively lean away against like heavier science fiction, because when it starts diving way into the science, it reads like a tech manual where some characters happen to do things in the background. Like, I don't care about your Snapple fact, but that's just who I am. Like, I first saw Star Wars in the theater, so science fantasy made me happier than science fiction, if that makes sense.
Same.
You know, like when I watch Interstellar, I'm bored out of my mind. I don't care about the black hole and the time dilation and things like
Can we
that.
kick him?
Can I?
Yeah,
talk about
actually,
that just
I
in
love it.
general?
And clearly, that man only loves his daughter, does not care about his son at all. Murph. Oh, I love Murph.
He son?
Whatever Casey Affleck's name is, fucking. But like Murph. Oh my God, Murph.
His grandkid died, and he's just like, oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
I think-
but back to
I think
Murph.
the line that people. Oh, go ahead, Si.
No, that was it.
No, he's mocking Murph.
I was gonna say that I think where sci-fi falls apart for me is when it tries to, and I don't mean to pick on Christopher Nolan, but he's guilty of this a lot. When it falls to trying to convince you that this thing is possible, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I really want to do a lot of front-end conversation about how this thing is. I tried to get through the beginning part of Tenet, and I thought, like, you don't have to do all of this, right? I kind of understand what you're going for. You don't have to be so heavy-handed in trying to explain this in, like, reality of physics, because at the end of the day, I'm on board. You did a better job of explaining, Inception to me in as little as possible, to just be like, we're doing a lot of hand-wavy stuff here, where he did less of that in whoever, is it his brother that's co-writing a lot of his movies? Like, we did a lot of hand-wavy stuff in Inception, but we tried to be a little bit more literal when we got to Tenet, and I go like, wow, this slows down a lot. This grinds to a halt in its explanation. I think that's where generally sci-fi fails, when it tries to it takes itself way too seriously when it doesn't need to. I'm on board for the
Right.
flux capacitor, goddammit. Like, you just tell me that that's a thing
Right.
that it does. Jump in the car and suddenly we're in the past. I'm on board for that. You don't need to tell me
Yeah.
the physics behind it.
It's
Like,
powered by
Audiences-
plutonium. Doc Brown built it, and it's good to go.
Stainless
that's the-
steel.
Most
Yeah.
audiences are willing to suspend their belief, when you go into something. But then when you try to overdo it, people don't care about that. One of my biggest influences was Doctor Who, like on sci-fi stuff. They have a freaking TARDIS, and the explanation is it's bigger on the inside.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need more than that. That's cool.
That's
Okay, it doesn't
that's
make
that's
sense.
awesome.
It's bigger on the inside.
yeah.
Well, and I mean,
the kind of
that's-
geek I grew up being was. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Go.
The kind of geek I grew up being was, I watched Flash Gordon as a child, and I read the old comics. My grandparents had it, and I watched the old animation, and I watched the movie, and then Highlander. Like, I don't know where these immortals come from, but I'm on board. Just say there's immortals, and that's all I need to know, and they're fighting. I like where they came from, why they are. Don't give a shit. And actually, the more you try to explain it, the more you dilute the magic of it. And but that's the science fantasy in me, not the science fiction. I
Yep.
know the nerds out there that want to know what an actual quantum warp bubble's like, and that's cool. It's just
Yeah,
not me.
I don't think that's unique to science fiction, though. There are a lot
No.
of things that get over-explained for the sake of over-explaining, because again, they believe that the over-explanation helps to legitimize the concept, when that's not really all that necessary.
Right.
Like, I can't imagine you over-explaining the criminals in the Goonies, or, the
The
I think that's
Fratellis?
the reason. That's the reason why Stranger Things 4 is working for me right now, because it
100%.
doesn't heavily lean into, like, let's over-explain where any and all of this stuff comes from. It benefits from the lifting that they did for the past 3 seasons, but I think that's why it lands so much better than the second and third one, because they tried to explain, they tried to go into too much backstory, and you're like, that's not really all that necessary.
And it's also
This thing still
juxtaposed
works.
against this coming of age story of these children as they are
Yeah.
changing
That's it.
from into their adolescence, into like
That's
their
it.
early teens, and the emotional
That's it.
hit.
Can you
And
Yeah.
the background
Can you imagine,
just
like,
works because of the
over-explaining
characters.
Ghostbusters? Like, I can't.
Well, they kind of did. I mean, they had their jargon, but to the point of like, there's psychokinetic energy. Here's a trap. Like, here's the thing. I know that the original drafts that Ramis and Aykroyd did were like overly done, and and when what's his name came in, the director whose name is who passed, and his name is escaping me, Reitman. He says,
Reitman.
cut that shit. Just say it and don't talk about it. And
Right.
just like, I don't need to know what a Kessel Run is. I don't need to know what just say it and go, and the audience will catch along.
Yep.
They
Well,
like
He
your
did it
jargon.
Actually, it was done really smartly through Egon, right? Like, Egon
Right.
was set up to be the jargon guy, and he just needed just get it out of the way. You just need enough jargon to say, hey, this is really technical. And then you juxtapose it right on top of Bill Murray's character, which is just like, whatever, I'm the dude out here. I am the audience perspective, where this is not really all that important, right? There's that really great scene in the elevator where they're trying to explain that they've never taken this out for a field test before.
Yes.
Right? And he's telling him, like, don't cross this. There's all sorts of things. Don't cross the streams, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah.
Unlicensed
it-
nuclear accelerator on your back.
There it is, right? It was so much of that, and back then you didn't know what the hell that was, right? But then
Sounded powerful.
You look at
Yep.
you look at, what do you call it? You look at Bill Murray's character, right? And he goes, right. So, and then he goes in explaining in such a way that we can understand to be like, oh, right, that's the dude that just says, hey, let's just go get that freaking ghost, right? Like,
Yeah.
do we have enough what we need? And can we do our jobs well enough without exploding? Okay, great. Good note, Ray, you know?
Yeah, well, and this is one of the things I think people need to remember is that before, like, in order for you to even have an audience, they already have to be somewhat bought into whatever it is you're selling, right? Otherwise, they're not picking up your book. They're not going to go see this title and be like, that I want to know about that. They've already bought in by the time they're an audience, by the time they're already consuming this. And just like you said, if you have a lot of technical jargon and stuff that you like, first off, supplemental books that go into all of that are phenomenal, but don't put it in the main.
Yep.
Right? In the main, it's just a thing that is. And you don't have to go into the whys and the hows and the sticky widgets and all that. It can just be, because that's
Sticky
something
widgets.
that's something that comes later. And I think another thing that a lot of people get really uncomfortable with as writers, especially when you're newer, you want to explain because you've lived with your characters. You know their backstories. You know why things matter. You know all of these little tiny nuances that make them unique, and you want to share that instantly with the audience because you want them to feel as endeared to them as you are. But your timing in which those things come about is crucial. If you front load it all in the beginning, then all that I get is, you really, really want me to like this character. And being the cynical little rebel that I am, I'm instantly going to stop liking the character unless you wrote them really well, because I'm like, no, like, you want me to like them, and fuck that. And everyone else is going to like them, so I'm not going to. But if you build it slowly, you know, just like we were talking before about, and I keep going back to this because A, it's one of my favorite book series, and B, I'm currently engrossed in it. The Hammer of Witches from Gib. When you go to Aggie and everything that she's gone through, you get that she's damaged. You don't get how damaged. You don't get why. You just get that she's a damaged person. And then as time goes on and you start to see, like, oh, she's got an addictive personality and now she has a drug problem. But she gets put in a position where, because the drugs that she uses are, you know, fantastical. It's not like she's using the blood of beasts. And for her, it's always just been a vial. It's always just been something that she takes, and then everything's, you know, she gets whatever power. And
She gets
wow,
high,
isn't that
or gets
cool?
just a little bit and just gets high. Yeah.
Exactly. And then there's a moment where that it's no longer a vial of blood, because she sees the source directly and she sees how it's affecting. And that moment, you watch it break her a little bit. And it turns into, like, okay, now I have a deeper understanding of this character and of her demons and how all of this is affecting her. And she's different after that. And Gib knew that all going into, you know, the first book that he was writing. He knew that this was going to happen. But it doesn't happen till the end of the first book. And having that timing where you spend all this time with her and she's kind of a dick, but she's kind of cool and you kind of like her. And then all of a sudden she has that moment, like, you break with her. And it's all about timing. And there's a lot of people who just get so excited that they just blow it all early. And then everyone's like,
I'm going
It
to
just
thank
doesn't
you for
matter.
those kind words.
cool.
And
Yeah.
frankly, I lucked into it. I mean, I'd like to say I planned it off from the very beginning, and it was all in my notes, and it was copious, and I knew it. My writing styles, I pick 3 or 4 major plot points, and then I write organically, and I get inside the person's head. And then when you go back and edit, you can fix some certain things. You write something later, like, oh, if I put something earlier, I can fix it. I make it look like I meant it the whole time. But when you get inside the person's head, you create a better person, you know, and be true, be honest. And then not everybody needs to be a champion or a paladin. They can be a little dirty. They can make mistakes. And then, you know, what line can they go up to before they come back from that line? And that's most fun I have with characters. And when I pick my genres, it's what works at the moment. My first books, like I was bigly influenced by I was very influenced by Yeah, Big League Chew. I was influenced by a lot of urban fantasy because that was unlike all. I grew up with fantasy books. Urban fantasy came along with a lot of the Harrison books and the Anita Blake books, and that was more love triangle based, and it just didn't do it for me. Then when Butcher hit, I'm like, oh, I kind of dig this because it's a little more action oriented, but I didn't want to just copy that. So I'm like, how do I set this thing? Like, well, what about post-apocalypse? What about post-biblical apocalypse? Because I grew up in the church. I grew up in a Baptist church, so it was like hellfire and brimstone. Every time you touch yourself, Jesus is going to kill you. You know, it's all demons are going to rise. And the end of Revelations basically says Jesus is going to come back. And there's going to be 1,000 years of darkness because hell's going to rule. And like, that scared the shit out of me as a kid. So I just took that fear and said, let's take that world, let's take a post-biblical apocalypse and make an urban fantasy novel with magic and angels and demons and cyborgs and technology. And then I started writing and I'm like, oh shit. If I advance time 150 years after the apocalypse, people are going to have new vernaculars, going to have new jargon, and I'm not talented enough yet. So how do I write myself out of this? Because people don't have souls anymore. So without souls, there's no creativity. So everybody's living off old past shit, and that's a currency. And then I said, okay, and just build the layers, and then you just stick in. Like, actually, the hardest thing I've written was one of the comedy books I wrote was that Agents of Mortal, because it's a police procedural. I thought, oh, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, this is gonna be kind of simple. It is not. It is one of the hardest things I've ever written because you know the crime, you know who did it. How do you lay the clues in such a way that, like, whoever's investigating it, it seems real, it seems logical. You didn't give it away in the very beginning, but if you look back on it, you'll see the clues and you'll see that. And that is the hardest thing I've ever written. And it's like, that's a challenge.
Page 3, you know who the killer is.
Yeah.
Hey, can I follow up on narrative choices real quick?
By all means.
Because I think that's at its vein, but that's why in spirit. That's what Gib was talking about. I've read Foreign Agent. I actually have it sitting next to my next to my desk over here because it's one I haven't read it in one sitting. I would read it in sections and forget whole chunks of it because I wouldn't read until like months at a time. So forgive me. But there's a narrative choice that you did here, Narwhal, what I wanted to ask you about, which is there's a whole lot of not talking, right? Especially from the home invader himself, or the homeowner himself. I'm not quite sure. Again, I'm losing the narrative because I don't read it for months at a time. But what led you to that space? And I'm gonna guess is like when I first saw this book, I thought like, oh, this is the guy who's done storyboards before, right? Because this is where all this quick gestural stuff is coming from. But a lot of it is you are having them emote minus the dialogue bubble. Were you leaning on that, or was that? I mean, what was the narrative choice? What are the narrative decisions that you had for that?
Yeah, I think that came from the concept a little bit was the idea of it being a language barrier and tackling that with a comic. I was excited about that because I wanted to do black bubbles on white to represent one language and white bubbles on black to represent the other. And then
give a quick breakdown of like the plot, just at the top level. What was the plot? Because when you're explaining it to people who've never read it before, to say like, oh, it's somebody speaking with a foreign language, and you decided to do it in a black bubble, they might not understand it in context. So just a quick breakdown on the plot in there.
So it's like it opens. Like, is it en media res? Like, kind of, you don't know what's happened, but two guys are stumbling through the forest in the snow. They come upon a house, and it looks like they kind of make a decision that they're gonna basically go in, but their plan is to try and do it peacefully, which kind of creates problems in itself. But they're sort of trying to win the family over a little bit. They aren't killers really, and the main way, the kind of gimmick of it another kind of initial thing that got me excited to try and do it as a comic is the way that they communicate is through drawings, because there's a boy in the house who's an artist, and then one of the soldiers is an artist. So they exchange drawings to try and communicate. And then for that art, I hired friends. So it's like meta art. It's like art within art. So I'm not drawing that art. The characters are drawing it or whatever. They're like cast. My friends got cast as doing this art. And then a lot of the story, because they don't even speak the same language, there's just less dialogue for that reason, really.
Yeah, that's great.
So Eric, how do you pick your genres?
What a weird I only have
What a weird question.
Thing.
It's the topic.
I don't there's no choice. I just go like,
who hired him?
That's the thing that I know, What do I pick? Especially when it comes to writing, I pick I say this with as much humility as I can. I pick the thing that I'm most comfortable with. I try because it's so early, right? For me to try, oh gosh, it would be fun to do a rom-com, but for me to try something that's out of my wheelhouse would be just an exercise in like failure because I don't know it well. So when it comes to picking. When it comes to picking something, especially for my first outing, it's something that I'm comfortably and familiar with, right? And whenever I read somebody's work who's working in the same space, which is like science fiction and superheroes and big action movies, I know how to sort of like dissect that and go about that's why that's not working. That's why that's not landing. You're not giving enough character there. So yeah, that's how I pick it. Now, if I were to go out and challenge myself, it would probably be in that rom-com space. I would love to be able to draw a comic book and
I would like to do
know
that too.
how to pull that off, but my style doesn't facilitate it, right? So there's the other coupling, right, which is not just the story in the comic book sense. I also have to couple it with the correct or appropriate sort of like visual, and I haven't found a way either to ramp my style up or down, depending, to help facilitate a good story. I think there's when Jack Kirby went and did romance comics, when Frank Frazetta did romance comics, there's a style that they sort of shifted into in order to help you sort of get into the right mindset that that's the kind of story that they're telling, because I can't imagine Jack Kirby doing fourth world new god stuff, telling you about how Kate lost her job and now she's got to break up with her boyfriend or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like it just didn't work stylistically. So it's those two considerations. One, what do I feel most comfortable with? Two, is my style helping to lend to the best sort of narrative?
Okay.
Cool. You could do a rom-com with action or something, maybe.
Oh, you could do a rom-com with action.
Oh, no. Imagine Arc Athena characters mid-battle with a rom-com.
I was just going to say, add a little romance in Arc Athena.
Yes, it
Next
would
time.
be so amazing.
That's asking so much of the audience right up front, right? Like right as my first outing, I'm doing an action adventure sci-fi comic book, and right in the middle of it, I'm all like, I'm just gonna make the needle skip right in the middle of this.
Just making an extra little short story.
I was going to say, do an ash can.
I'll
Do a
it.
little
Yeah,
ash
yeah.
can of
I'll do
it.
it.
I like
you can include it.
working
You can
outside
include
of
it
my
with your other
comfort zone.
stuff. I started doing this whole thing on our campaigns where I'll do tiers where only the people that get that tier, they'll get like a couple of flash fiction pieces that are based off of B characters or whatever, just for my own kicks and giggles to play around with other characters and tell fun stories. But it's little extras like that get people more invested in the world as well.
For sure.
Eric, I'm gonna read, and then I'm gonna pick a good section to just shoehorn in
Yeah, let's do
a
that.
rom-com drama thing between two of your characters, and I'm gonna pitch it to you as an ash can for like Arc Athena 4.
The idea of it is just making my anxiety shoot the roof. I'm like, it's not as if I don't have enough pages to draw, like let me just right in the middle of this thing or shift into another gear where I'm doing another style,
Oh no, do the exact same style, have it look exactly the same. It's just the
I can't
dialogue
even
is gonna
imagine.
get a little.
People be like, I like early Eric Canete before we went all wrong.
I like book 1 Eric Canete as opposed to like book 3.5 Eric Canete where he's doing.
Basically, just
You know,
MST3K
she's all-
yourself.
Yeah. You know what that reminds me of is I was thinking a little bit about some of this stuff, and it's a game that girls play where they pluck the petals and they say, he loves me not, he loves me not. I'm like, the reason that they do that is that it's the entertaining aspect of it is that it's paranoia. So like the paranoia is he loves me not. It's switching back and forth between these two beliefs and not knowing which one is true. And I was like, oh, it's paranoia. So maybe there's some rom-com paranoia possibilities out there.
Yeah, I think that's when you get into like the misery style of fandom, though, where you've got like, oh, my favorite author needs to be nursed back to health, and I'm just gonna tie him to bed and break his legs so he can't leave.
Well,
Yeah.
I
you know,
love his stuff so much.
There's
It's like-
actually a French movie called He Loves Me, He Loves Me Not, and the first half of the movie you think you're watching a rom-com, and it ends with her showing up at this doctor who she thought she loves house, and then she turns on the gas and sticks her head in the oven, and then the whole movie rewinds, and it tells the story from the doctor's perspective, where she was straight up stalking him and sending him like a heart with an arrow through it, and it ends with like a big thing of her being in the mental asylum and them letting her out, thinking she's okay. And as the door closes, behind it is like a post-it mural of the doctor. And but it's
I
a play
need to
on both
see
those
this.
genres. It's a rom-com for the first half, and you have no idea that in reality she's a crazy stalker.
One of my absolute favorite genres ever. Like, one of the reasons that I love horror is I love misdirection. I love when people do really good perspective shifts, and especially when it's something like that where you have two totally opposing perspectives that should not be able to coexist, and you find ways to make it logically coexist because, well, she's batshit crazy, but in her world, she's just madly in love.
Yep.
And he's just the most amazing thing ever. And then she does one thing at the end that makes you go like, "Ooh, wait, hold on, that's wrong. That's the wrong move." And it's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, rewind back, it's because she's a crazy stalker, and this doctor is actually terrified for his life." And you're like, "Okay. All right, that is not the story I thought I was watching. This is very different." Gone Girl did it really well. That one.
Oh yeah.
I really enjoyed that.
In the very beginning, you're like, "Fuck that dude," and then halfway through, you're like, "This poor man. Oh, get away from her. She's so insane." And like just watching those personality quirks and the like, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I know exactly how I'm making you look, and I'm perfectly okay with it. And you're just like, "Nope, that is not the story I thought I was watching."
Yeah, that's cool.
Did you all feel something similar with the movie? Oh gosh, what is the Jordan Peele movie before Us? What was it called? Was it Get Out?
Get Out.
Yeah.
Did you guys feel the same way? Similar kind of vibes where it was trying to tell one story and then it shifted into, or was it always? Maybe I'm misremembering the plot of the movie. Nope, it's pretty straightforward.
I thought it was pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
Well,
I think Us did more of the redirection
Yeah.
kind of thing, and in all honesty, I feel like I knew where he wanted to go with it, and it was cool. But there was like a couple of key points that he did at the end that were supposed to be super impactful, and I was like, but logically that doesn't make any sense. If this isn't who he thinks it is, he wouldn't feel this. Like, why? That makes no. So like the whole ending that's supposed to be like dun dun dun. I picked apart in 2 seconds instantly after watching it.
I liked Get Out. I felt Us was a little Shyamalan. And
Yeah.
it's just building up to a stinger that may or may not like hit, you know.
Yeah.
Even like early Shyamalan movies, like The Sixth Sense was, I mean, truthfully, it was brilliant. It blew everybody away because it hadn't been done before. Then everything after that just became, what's the twist? Whether that's The Village, whether that's
literally Robot Chicken. Anytime M. Night Shyamalan showed up, all he would say is, "What a twist!"
Exactly,
Like, every
it's a
single
twist.
time.
Yeah.
That's all that he did.
Right, and that's not a story. That's something you're building to for like a shock value, you know. But he made his money in the beginning, and then he made Avatar: The Last Airbender, you know, and that's a thing too. So, but
I
he
like what
came
he
back
did.
with Split. You know, he came back with a couple other things. You know, it's.
I
never
like
wrote a
the
movie.
movies that Jordan Peele is making, though. You know, like I think it's not trying to do what Shyamalan I think set himself up for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is like we've got to have the big twist ending, we've got to have this big reveal, right? I think he's still very heavily into the narrative, right from the get-go. He's not trying to pull one over on you by saying.
I'm not going
like,
to say yes. I'm not going to say no because I mean, here's the thing. If you look back, you could argue it one way or the other. And Get Out, it's like spoilers, like. You think it's a race-related thing, but it's like it's just a fashion flow for these super rich to be inside of these bodies, and it's
Correct,
okay.
right.
And then
it's a class thing
and then,
as opposed to a race
yeah,
thing.
a class exactly. And so that was a joke on you, but it wasn't. And then in the next one, this out like, oh, it's really us from inside, but oh no, the mom was flipped the whole time, or something to that effect. It's been a while since I watched it, so
Sure.
they both have these kind of twist-like moments, not to the same degree, but I will say that Peele has better character work.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it's, you know, Bruce
think
Willis
that's-
carried that, and Haley Joel Osment carried that because they were both talented, but it's not because of the dialogue. I mean, it was just creepy kid says creepy things, and Malcolm Crowe watches. That's the movie. So
Sure.
Well, and I think that I think that's, you know, partially why I'm a little let down by some of Peele's movies is because you've got good character development, like you got characters that I like, but the plot lines kind of fall apart. Like they get to a point where it's like this was really good, and then it kind of fizzles a little bit, and I think that just comes from, I don't think that he's written a whole lot and gotten a lot of feedback on it, especially probably prior to being famous, having a name for himself. Because once you're famous, getting honest feedback gets a lot harder to come across.
Yeah.
yeah,
Because
you get
everybody
the prequel,
loves
you
everything
get the George
you do.
Lucas prequels. Yeah,
But
it's
but
like
the
crazy.
same argument applies. I mean, for anybody that's a writer, I'm sure, unless you guys are really a lot better than I am at suspending your intuition or whatever when you watch a movie, I cannot tell you the last time I've watched a movie and had a moment that I was like, oh, there's no way I would have guessed that.
True.
I cannot tell you the last time. And most everything now, it's, I mean, because the thing on writing is everything's the hero's journey. The best that we can do with the hero's journey is take little pieces out of it and either rearrange them, forget one piece of it, or completely flip one of them on its head. That's where you get shock value. That's where you get the maybe I didn't see that coming. But for writers, we're already inclined to try to figure this stuff out as soon as the movie starts, you know. And I remember movies like going to see the Wonder Woman movie when that first came on. Just as soon as you're sitting in there and they're like, oh, there was a war and that one god got injured. The first time you see somebody with a cane, my first thought's, oh, okay, so that's the bad guy. And of course it is, because that's just how writing works nowadays.
Right. Well, no, it's similar to the way my wife watches movies. She cannot turn her brain off.
Right.
So right around the 10-minute mark, which is like, hey, we're going to set up the arc of this entire movie. She pauses the movie and she goes, okay, here's my theory. And I'm like,
I do that same thing. I do the exact
knock
same
it
thing.
off. You're just ruining this experience
It's-
for me. Because
I'm
I have
a-
two viewings, right? Like the viewing that I have is the initial sort of, you know, like, I don't know. I try to turn my brain off in either of these two viewings, either at the first or the second, where I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna watch this for the sake of watching it, because storyboarding and working on movies, I have a tendency to do the same, which I look at things, I'm like, that's a really bad shot. That's not really landing the emotional narrative that you're trying. Like that composition really sucks. For whatever it is, right? And the second time or the first time, I'm like, I'm just gonna sit here and experience it. But my wife cannot help herself. She literally hit the remote and be like, okay, here's my theory. And I'm like, oh jeez.
I've done that in the middle of watching Prime with Shae, and let me tell you, nothing will get a woman to want to punch you quicker than stopping a movie and doing that, especially if you're right, because then it's been spoilers, because you know you've jumped the gun and not let her come to her own conclusions, and yeah, you will pay that price.
And half the time I already have the same idea, but I would like to see how it plays out, so shut up.
My wife does this when she pauses it and she goes, so wait a minute, what's going on? Who's this again?
Oh, no.
What do you why are they doing this? I'm like, watch the fucking movie. Just stop. Give
Pay
me the remote.
attention.
You don't earn remote
Slide her a
privileges.
notebook and a pen and be like, this is for you now.
I am unfortunate, like, because ever since prior I was writing all my life, but when I sat down to like start writing novels, like it's kind of like you start seeing how the sausage is made. So you do your best not to like watch this narrative and not how would I do it, how do I break it down, and try to enjoy it for what it is. And it's actually it takes good character development, because if it's just characters in service of the plot, I start picking it apart. If it's characters dictating the plot, then I'm paying attention.
Yeah.
And your character work, like Eric mentioned before he was on, like I've never picked his brain about this, but I am in love with the show that's on Netflix, Arcane, because that is some of the best character work that meets animation and beats style that I've seen in years.
Still
And
haven't
I
seen
am-
it.
I'm blown away by the relationship between Jinx and Vi, and
Did you play the
subsequent
games?
relationship. No, never
Me
did. I mean,
either. Me either. And I think that may be why I enjoyed the series so much, is because the story development is
I
insanity.
knew of League of Legends, and I knew some people played other MOBAs, and so I know about the rough idea of Piltover. But seeing this thing fleshed out in such a way, because also I'm a huge like I stand for like steampunks kind of thing. So when it looks kind of like Carnival Row, but in this animation world with just hints of magic and elements like that,
Yeah.
they're like just enough to tease it out. They're like, oh man, I'm just popcorning it the whole time, because again, it's the best characters work I've seen in years.
I hadn't thought about that show in a minute, but absolutely, yeah.
I can't stop.
It's one of the most fresh things that I have watched in a long time.
Right.
All right. Gib, did you tell us about how you pick your genres? Because
No, no one gives a fuck about me. No. I kind of did
little
it anyway without being asked. I pick what genre I feel. What services the plot, because sometimes I'll have an idea like, hey, I got this cool idea. And I just like kind of spin that carousel. Where would this fit best? Or what's has been done too much, so let's try something else. Or can I take a superhero story and try something different with it? And like, what's actually different? You're trying to like plant a flag on something that doesn't exist. So, what feels right, I guess. In my villains books, every book I pick a different genre and like kind of like pick at it from a meta commentary. The first book's about fantasy. The next one's all superheroes. The third one is a space opera, and the fourth one's heist movies. But it's all from a villain's perspective, how to make other villains better. And it's fourth wall breaking, and it's up its own ass with how funny he thinks he is. It doesn't matter. But playing in those different genres is always fun. I mean, I have a book I want to write. I want to write a horror horror romance. I want to mash those two together. I've got the idea of like take one of the three Furies who are meant to hurt people who just want to fall in love while they're dismembering somebody. Imagine three of the Furies sitting around having this conversation about like, why can't I just find a nice person while they're like dismembering a rapist? Because they punish the wicked. And so I had that stupid idea in my head. Like, I'm going to write that one day. So I'm saying it first before anybody else steals it on the interwebs. I just don't know when.
I just copyrighted it, Gib.
I'm going to punch you.
Oh, God.
I actually did have a question. And this is kind of a two-part question, I guess. Do you ever, in your writing, since you write different series and different genres, do you ever steal from one of your properties for the other?
All the time.
And to kind of add on to that, do you ever, when you're writing, I don't know, like Aggie, you're writing in that world and you steal something for Technomancer? That's easy because they're both in the same universe, or any of the other ones.
Yeah. I will lift certain things. Unfortunately, I've realized I have certain catchphrases I fall back on, and that's a writer's flaw, and you have to watch out for that. So, exactly.
I was wondering if you were going to catch that.
Yeah, I caught it. Yeah, but there are certain it's not stealing when I take it from myself. If you take it from somebody else, it's called inspiration, I guess. But try to repackage it a little bit.
It's called efficiency when you steal from yourself.
If you already laid the groundwork, then why not stick with it? No, I mean, you're always trying to make everything fresh. It's also, not everybody reads all your books, so there's a very good chance they're not going to read everything, whether that's a comic, novel, see your movies, watch a show, whatever. They're not going to consume all your products. So if you have a theme or an idea, not necessarily the same characters or a dialogue, but if you have certain isms that would also fit here, just polish it a little bit and stick it in there. Why not? It's your mind.
Now I'm going to get all your books and compare.
You should.
Yeah.
I need the money.
You
Right?
You use the word "the" an awful lot. Just saying.
It's a repeating theme. All right, so we've been going for almost an hour. Gib, do you have questions for
I
our
do.
guests?
Yeah, I do.
I see how it is. You have questions for the guests, you don't have questions when it's just us. Fair.
Yeah, because you didn't ask me to last time. Also, Eric wasn't with last time.
All right.
I'm still pissed off, Gib. I just want you to know that.
Rochambeau
next
between our guests. Who wants to go first?
This is a scenario-based question I'm going to pitch to you, and
Oh,
your
why
job
do
is
you
to
gi-
just react.
Look at you giving them a bailout.
No,
I
it's
like
just-
them being terrified about what's coming next. I think it's funny.
I've got one specifically for Rini on the next one because she's already done this. So,
Narwhal. I'm volunteering you to go first.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay.
all right, stick with me. I don't know if any of this is true, so just stick with the story, okay?
Shit.
Your grandmother calls you up and asks, "Why don't you visit more often?" There's no getting out of this. So you go visit her, just pop in. She invites you in and sets out some freshly made cookies, grandma's, am I right? You take a bite or two and chocolate chips, and you just kind of remember being young. Grandma's in the kitchen making some tea, and you flip through one of her old photo albums on the coffee table, marveling at the life of this old lady. But then you flip one of the pages and you see shallow graves amid a grassy field, the grassy field that's behind her house. Then you notice inside these graves are your cousins. Wait a minute, is that your mom? Is that your dad? You look up and see Granny standing in the kitchen doorway. She's holding a knife. No one visits me anymore. And that's when you feel the drugs and the cookies kick in. You have one weapon of choice, 3 books, and 1 luxury item. What do you do?
Damn, Granny's done.
One weapon of choice. It's like a pen that I pull from my pocket and hold it like a knife. And what did you say? What are the other things?
A luxury
You get
item
3
and 3 books.
If you
3
want.
books. 3 books I just would stack, like the novelizations of early Donkey Kong video games in my breast pocket and hope that it stops a stabbing wound. And I'd get her in the neck with the pen. And my luxury item might be a Gatorade. When it's all done, I'll refresh myself.
And what are you going about the drugs that are in your system that you're slowly starting to get woozy from?
I think I'd fall out the window, crawl into an early grave, and hug my mom and cry.
Ouch. Yeah.
Jeez. Oh, this got so dark. Oh. I think that Narwhal wins for most efficient answer because he hit all of the items. They all make narrative sense.
I wasn't the gentleman who did the Killjoy, Adam. Didn't he just say, "I just give up. I'm not doing." They win. I'm just gonna lay down.
I guess I die. And then Jason Krager was like, "I take him hostage because you don't come for me, motherfucker." We're like,
You mess with
"Damn,
the wrong
Krager,
motherfucker.
okay."
Yeah.
All right, Aaron, you ready for this? You don't have the same scenario.
You get a different
Yeah.
question.
Different.
Okay.
All right. The circus in town, and you figure, what the hell? You've been bored recently, and you need the distraction. If nothing else, it'll make for great people watching, am I right? Get some stories. You see the sights, you check out the acts, even get your fortune read, all the normal stuff. But while you're sitting in the big top, you see the clowns come out, and you're like, oh no, this isn't for me. And you get up to leave. A hand clamps down on your shoulder, and you look behind you, and they say, no, stay. The person holding it, their face begins to change. Their nose grows into a red ball. Their face shifts to white mask of colored paint. Their hair turns bright red and their feet elongate. All around you, everyone in the stand starts shifting into clowns. We make the world laugh, they say in unison. Now you'll make us laugh. You have one weapon of choice, 3 books, and 1 luxury item. What do you do?
3 books would be any Ayn Rand books because they're huge. So great weapons. I guess popcorn because I think I'm probably just going to be here for a while. And I would start asking where each of them got their clown college degrees from. Luxury item doesn't really matter anymore. So there's too many people. I don't know. I'm just going to be a clown now.
Where clowns are coming, that's going to happen. So
Yep.
You gotta do like the horn.
Yep.
That's your luxury.
But on
item.
myself, just
A tiny car.
a tiny car so everyone can just
steal
get
their
in it.
tiny car.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Just rip off the Joker and get one of those squirting flowers, but with acid in it.
Yeah.
that's not ripping. That's literally from Jack Nicholson in the first Batman.
All right. I want to thank our guests for joining us. This was a really fun episode and definitely a lot of really good discussion. And of course, thank you to the wonderful panel. You guys are epic as always. Thank you, Eric, for carving out some time in your incredibly busy schedule of being a wonderful parent. And for everybody who's watching, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to Red Valkyrie. Hit the bell. What else do we got? We got if you want to have your work reviewed by our 4-person panel, so me, Eric, Gibby, and Cy, go ahead and send in your 3-page or less submissions to redvalkyrie.writingprose@gmail.com. And we're going to be reviewing these quarterly and should be a good time. So thank you all for watching, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Writing Prose. Please like, share, and subscribe if you've enjoyed our content. You can also become a channel member or visit our merch store to help support us. We're currently accepting fan-submitted stories for anonymous, on-air review later in the season. Send your submissions to redvalkyrie.writingprose@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.